All right. Today, I'm very excited. I know I'm very excited for every episode, but I'm super excited to talk with Alex Sheehan, my guest today, who's a spoken word poet, a mental health, I was going to say advocate, but I think John Nelson, our good friend, says that that's too passive. So let's call you a mental health activist and a member of the One Mind lived experience community. You're laughing because that sounds like John, right?
That is John to a T.
It's John to a T. Awesome. Alex's story is one of finding language where language felt really impossible, using poetry, creative expression to navigate depression, anxiety, mania, and suicidality when really conventional words were not enough. He has written beautifully about the intersection of arts and mental health, and I'll link to that article in the podcast bio, and also the growing movement around social prescribing, which was a new term to me, the idea that creativity and community can be as healing as clinical intervention. Like me, Alex is connected to One Mind, a leading mental health nonprofit that has been championing this very idea through initiatives like Apollo and Psyche, and an evening of art, music, storytelling, and dance in support of mental health that actually inspired me to put on a very similar event here in Detroit last year, and we're hoping to do another one this year, so very excited for that. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Hilary Marusak. I'm a neuroscientist and your host of BrainSTEM, and I could not be more excited to have this conversation because it's a little bit different today. Not just what's happening inside the brain, but also when art becomes medicine. So, Alex, welcome. So excited to chat with you. Happy birthday, too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, especially on my birthday. This was a nice treat to myself in a fun and a weird way. So
I love it. And you're also in the middle of a move, so you've got a lot going on, but I appreciate it. So you've
thanks.
described a time when conventional language felt completely inadequate to describe what you were going through. What was that like, and how did creative expression fill that gap for you?
Well, I think there was just this point where words just like broke on me.
Hmm.
Not because I didn't have a vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was more because nothing in my vocabulary felt really honest enough or like true enough to really hold what I was experiencing and more dangerously also internalizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it felt like if you've ever heard that adage, it's a lot like pouring, an ocean into a shot glass. Like everything is just gonna spill. There's not enough in the world to contain and what I was trying to convey, and I had always felt like broken and incomplete.
Hmm.
I guess like what I was going through lived in my body more than in my words. It was very chaotic, certainly very nonlinear, and at times even contradictory. And I feel like language, especially like clinical language, especially derived from, Western medicine, wants things very neat and categorized and organized. And I was none of those things, and I'm still not any of those things, even on, I think,
Right.
my best days. But spoken word poetry didn't like it, and creative expression in general didn't ask me to clean things up. I could be raw. I didn't have to sugarcoat things for my sake or for your comfort. I could just be how I felt. I could be fragmented. I could be lost. I could be in the throes of, just things going on in my head. And
Mm-hmm.
spoken word poetry and just writing in general, I think not only gave me an outlet or gave me like a new world, but it gave me permission to see things and explain things in a way that was unique to my own. I got to
Mm-hmm.
make my own language. I could use metaphors and old adages where like direct truth felt either too sharp or too real. And that was really, I feel like, the shift for me. It over time, the more I wrote and the more just random open mic nights that I went to, a coffee shop, a brewery, um, I realized like it wasn't about finding the right words. Um, Poets might tell you otherwise, but like for me, it was more about just finding a space where my like imperfect expression wasn't called imperfect expression. It was just expression. It was validated and it
Hmm.
was normal and like I didn't have to translate pain and anguish into things that were just palatable for yours and mine's sake and comfort, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for painting that picture. It sounds like this is really a lifeline for you. And I loved how you described that, in medicine and psychiatry, we try to put people into these nice, even boxes, and that's just not reality. And even as you say, the words we have to describe what people experience don't encapsulate. And how do you encapsulate something that's, as you said, internally contradictory and it kind of lives in your body? So I love that this has been kind of maybe an unexpected lifeline for you. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I and honestly, I did stop for a little while,
Hmm.
just because I was focused more on like I guess you could say getting better.
Sure.
And But then I restarted again. And this is gonna sound like so cliche, but like was dating the same person from most of high school through the end of college, and just things sunsetted, and like it was amicable, and I thought I was doing
Hmm.
okay, but it turns out I wasn't doing okay with that, and so I was like, I'm just gonna write again because
Yeah.
if it helped me with something that was a whole hell of a lot worse than what I was going through a few years prior, then I feel like in my younger 20s, like a heartbreak is a heartbreak, and I knew that, I acknowledged that, but it's obviously different when you're going through it, and so I restarted, and from there I never stopped.
That's
So
amazing. And Alex, I'm so curious, like, how did you get into this? Were you always like creative as a kid, or where did this start?
no, I actually started writing, um,
Hmm.
and I don't consider myself a religious man. Um, but I have no idea what in the YouTube algorithm happened like 20 years ago when we had baby YouTube. I don't even know if algorithms were a thing back then, but there was this video, and I go back and watch it. I think it's almost 20 years old by now. This guy, Pastor Phil Allen, wrote a and performed. It was just a black and white silhouetted, like 5.5, 6 minute video that he called "When I Became a Man," and it a lot of what he was talking about, the words he was using, the Bible verses he was citing, the things that helped him to quote, put be a man and to put the toys away was, an iconic line. And for me, as I think as I was trying to answer in the first question, this it wasn't what he was conveying because again, I'm not a religious person, so he could tell me, you know, something from Ephesians, something from and I don't know what he's saying, but it was how he said it. That was it right there. It wasn't the poem, it wasn't the words, it was the medium, it was the expression.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
you could feel the journey that this man went through. And I've never met this man. I was introduced to him by a 5.5 minute spoken word video that he did. And I was just like, wow. Usually I was never a creative kid, but I was a
Hmm.
very loud kid. I always felt like I always had something to say, but that was one of those rare instances that I could count on both of my hands and my toes that I was just completely dumbfounded and in utter shock and was just left in complete silence because I was like, wow, this guy is telling me everything about him
Hmm.
just by how he speaks
Hmm.
and in the manner in which he carries himself in just a random YouTube video.
Wow.
And so I was like, I just tried to my hand at writing. some better than others, but that I think I had finally, after about the second or third time, had finally started to unlock that feeling I got from watching him, but for myself.
Yeah. That is so cool that you can point to like that exact moment when it was like, wow, like this, as you said, like a YouTube video could have that much of a profound impact and you really understood and kind
Yeah.
of felt his story.
Yep. I think it was, beginning of senior year of high school, almost, literally
Wow.
half my life ago, when I saw that, and I will never forget that moment. I have
That
no
is
idea why my
crazy.
brain chose to remember that, but
Yeah.
it did. And to me, that signifies a certain level of importance, and I won't argue with it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I feel like you were so ahead of the curve. Like I think people look at things like spoken word or stand up or insert your like quote unquote hobby, like if it's painting or dancing or whatever it is or creating music, and they do think that it's just a hobby, but what you are saying and what the science is now beginning to finally respect and back up is that this is actually a genuine health behavior. So
Yeah.
why has it taken so long to get to that point, in your opinion?
Um, I think because lived expertise, of any kind, not just mental health, um, has never really been a starting point on a map. You know, it's generally considered an afterthought in science, and I think that, like you said, people knew, communities know art heals. Storytelling and spoken word, not just in poetic forms, goes back thousands of years, right? It's like it fosters cultural resilience. It teaches us and allows us to pass down moral lessons, histories, even in some cases ancient wisdom, right? And but among all of those things, it heals. It simply heals. And I
Hmm.
feel like science tends to move at the speed of what it can quantify
Mm,
and understand and bring into the world in that way. But the human experience, especially when we're talking about, complex human emotion, our brain physiology and chemistry, even the things that make us feel good, all culminate to this human experience that doesn't move that way, you
yeah.
know? So I think, as I guess a spoken word artist, it's always weird to call myself something like that. I feel like what we're seeing now is like brain science, neuroscience, just in general, like catching up to something that
Yes.
was already happening. So instead of science arriving somewhere first and then everything else catching up to that, I feel like the inverse is true
Hmm.
with creative expression, where it was already happening. It's been happening long before we understood it. In, again, community spaces, in cultural spaces, these places weren't at the time labeled as creative expression or social prescribing or things of that nature. Non-clinical intervention, I think, is the term
Yeah.
used in science, and I think that there's an important lesson there,
Hmm.
where just because something isn't formally recognized, like, or at least recognized yet, doesn't mean that it's not real. It doesn't mean that it never happened, and it also doesn't mean that it isn't working. And so I feel
Right.
like science is finally just catching up to like the integration and embeddedness of the true human experience into brain science. And I think that's the coolest thing ever.
Quote unquote. That was beautiful. Yeah, no, that was really cool. And as a brain scientist, I can completely agree with you. We are just catching up to what you said as we can't quantify the human experience, but there's something there that's been used for millennia that we need to understand and validate. So that gets into my next question, which is this idea of like social prescribing, like going to a doctor and having them say, and some of them already do something like this, like, oh, get physical activity in, here's your recommended, here's your sleep level. But the idea that a doctor might refer you to creative activities or community instead of or alongside even, our traditional kind of Western treatments like medications, like how does that make you feel? Does it excite you, or does it kind of risk losing what makes it special? Because you pointed out that when you're in these coffee joints and places like that, like there's also a community aspect that's really, you can't have like a pill that gets that community validation. And we're also
Yeah.
dealing with like this loneliness crisis post COVID. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I think this is one of those things where I feel like multiple, alongside many other things, this is a space I feel like where there is definitely going to be, at least in terms of this question, multiple truths, or at least both things can be true. It can be both exciting and risky. And so it excites me more so, but I can see a risk. And if I can provide an example, but like, again, I think it's okay for both things to be true at the same time. On the one hand, I'm uber excited. Like I said, at 17, 18, when I found Pastor Phil Allen's video, all I ever wanted to do right then was like write. Even if it was just, it made no sense, and most of the journals and things that I filled up over the years don't really make any sense. Where I'm like, I go back and look at it and I'm like, oh, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But like this idea that a provider can say, hey, alongside your medication management, your treatment regimen, you know, I want to see you, get out there,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be like a dance class or
Mm-hmm.
equine therapy, or in my case,
Mm-hmm.
writing. It's we're not only caring about, the literal like biology and the neurobiology of our brain and our physical makeup, but when we're introducing like social prescribing into it, we're now opening the door to a more like whole person, human centered approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right there is the importance, because by doing that, even through Western medicine, which over the years was kind of adverse to it, at least in my opinion, we're now acknowledging that like healing isn't just chemical,
Mm-hmm.
you know. It's expressive, it's relational, and it's beautiful. Especially when we bring both of those things together.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, a room of 50 strangers who are never going to get together ever again, like, or outside of your locals. But like for 1 hour, or the 5 minutes that I get to talk on stage, I get to speak my truth, and like the room of, very cruddy dim lighting and 50 rickety chairs becomes my universe for a little while. And in that
Mm-hmm.
space, healing, I think, was able to help support and augment like the medication management in its own, unique and profound way. But I feel like as this movement grows, there's, I think, always a risk, because this, like, the moment that sometimes something becomes formalized, I feel like there's a temptation almost to standardize it, uh, to measure it, to evaluate it, to package it into something, And I think what made those spaces for me, you know, powerful in the first place is that they will never be controlled.
Mm-hmm.
It's just 50 people just, speaking raw truth out into the world. We're not there to fix each other. we're there to just witness each other.
Hmm.
And so I think this question becomes like, can we continue to like meaningfully and authentically like bring this in and embed this into medical systems
Hmm.
without stripping away the humanity that makes it work? That
Hmm.
is the part that makes it work. It is acknowledging and uplifting and celebrating my humanity. Um, because, if we turn it into just like, another box to check, right? You're gonna lose the magic
Hmm.
of that moment. You're gonna
Special
lose the magic.
ingredient.
Yeah, exactly. But I think if we do it right, we expand access to something that, people shouldn't have to find by accident. This was my happiest little accident in my life.
Wow.
Um, but yeah.
No, that was amazing. And I've seen it for myself. The event we hosted last September in Detroit, we had a formerly incarcerated individual who did some spoken word, and it was like you were saying, it was like so electric, and we were in this unique little universe, and there was no judgment, and it was just so raw. So I have seen it, but the idea of me getting up in front of people and doing poetry scares the crap out of me. So, for folks who don't like gravitate towards something like that, like how should they find their own creative expression?
Um,
I'm even laughing
Man,
because you even just like hesitated for folks on camera when you were like, "Oh, I guess I am like a spoken word artist." Like, what does that look like?
I think, yeah, in the truest and the simplest form of the word, try it. Um,
Yep.
I've tried even like expanding the mediums in which I express myself.
Hmm.
And like I've tried like everything from painting to sketching to drawing,
Hmm.
even like charcoal art, things of that nature, things outside of video games that offered its own form of, therapy and escapism, but that's a story for another day. But like, I don't know. I just found that writing allowed me to expand and like I got to expand my world and my worldview in a different way. And I feel like, not everyone, like you said, is going to walk into a poetry slam. Uh, and I think we use the word slam to make it sound cool. Uh, and that's okay. I'm somebody that if you stick me in front of a stage of people, I have never had a problem with like talking to people, talking to a crowd in any way, shape, or form. But
I've
my
seen it. It's
inverse is true,
amazing.
where stick me in front of a one-on-one conversation
Mm.
like this, and I'm gonna fluster and I'm going to be a lot less confident than I know I
Interesting.
am, but I don't feel like I am. But that's just me. And again, the point isn't the medium. I've learned that the point is the expression. So again, going back to Dr. Phil Allen, no idea a lot of the like metaphors and the examples he was using that made sense to him, but they didn't make sense to me.
Hmm.
All I knew was I was watching 5.5 minutes of something like awesomely beautiful,
Hmm.
so different than anything else I've ever seen. And again, I could feel this man. I could I could resonate with this man. I could in the closest sense of like being like displaying empathy and putting yourself in someone's shoes. I literally felt like I was that man and like feeling it because of the expression behind his words.
Hmm.
And creative expression to me, it and for anybody, I think it shows up in a bunch of different ways. Again, it could be music, it could be painting, journaling, cooking. Don't put me in the kitchen. Photography, even how somebody moves their body.
Yeah.
You've got all of these different mediums, right? A poem can hold despair, a song can carry anger, a story can express hope, a dance, the way that we move our body can invoke a type of ancestral wisdom and healing that we did not even know. And that's the point right there. It's like it's just learning and moving like your body and your mind in a way that makes sense to you. It doesn't have to make sense to a single soul because I feel like the whole point is of creative expression is, and I use this old, I use a lot of, metaphors in my article, Down the Rabbit Hole. I go with one mind where I describe, like, again, it's the expression because it's about finding a place where your internal world has room to exist outside of yourself.
Hmm.
And but the biggest barrier I see is people will be like, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I'm not a poet." Heck, I still do that. I did it 20 minutes ago
Uh-huh.
not even 20 minutes ago here in this chat. And I'm learning to push back on that little by little, even if it also means pushing back on myself.
Mm.
Because again, it's not about being good. It's not about performance. It's about permission, giving yourself the permission to feel, to be raw, to be unapologetically and understanding to yourself and yourself only. And if there are other
Right.
people around you to witness that, fantastic.
Hmm.
But it doesn't always have to work like that. It's to help you process something. For me, it helped me to feel something. It helped me to create my own language, see the world upside down, sideways, diagonally, in a way that made sense to me. And what it did was it gave me, each time I did it, it gave me more and more relief,
Wow.
and clarity. And that right there counts. That counts for more than anything. Again, you
Absolutely.
don't need the audience. You don't need the validation. You just need a space where your internal world can exist outside of your body and you can show the world who you are in that way.
That is so cool. You have inspired me. I am going, because I'm always the same way. Like, oh, I don't want to show anyone my drawing because it's terrible. But like, it's about the process and it's about being imperfect, right?
Yeah,
That is
exactly. It's
so
about being
cool.
imperfect and just unapologetically you, as cliche as sometimes that, or hallmarky as sometimes that sounds. It is one of the truest things in the world. And I feel like the things that people often brush off like that
Hmm.
are because they know that it's true, but it brings a certain level of uncomfortability to
Right.
know that you know that.
Right.
And that right there is, I feel like, the start of that journey.
Right. Oh, amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience into the creative arts. I want to talk a little bit about suicidality, and I know this is something you've talked openly about. I do want to point
Yeah.
out for those who, if anything in this conversation is upsetting, there is a national suicide hotline. I have it saved in my phone, 988. You can call or text at any point. But, how does creative expression factor into that aspect of what you've experienced? And is there something that you wish that the mental health system could do better in that space? I'm sure that's a very long answer, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Um, ooh. I think I've been in a lot of places where, like, the question wasn't, you know, how do I thrive? It
Hmm.
was, how do I just make through the day? Like, I'm just trying to survive. And before I knew what social prescribing was, and I only know about that now because of my dear friend, also named Alex. She's the one who told me about all of what social prescribing, arts and mental health was. So because of her, I now have like a name for this. But prior when I didn't, I was just doing it to survive. That's it. You know, um, Anguish is a very raw and a very fickle thing to me. Um, and one of the only things, and at the time, the only thing I could do was just write stuff down. And I don't know if it was catharsis or just like I'm getting a dopamine hit from this. I still don't know why. It always made me feel better, but it did, and it still
Yeah.
does. And I think in those moments, spoken word wasn't this, big, beautiful, polished thing. That's the last thing it was. Again, I'm just trying to survive here.
Hmm.
It was I don't want to say it was about getting out of my own head because that's not what it was, but it was about trying my best to step um, into the world
Hmm.
outside of me so that I didn't stay trapped inside of me, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
that meant that again, writing and my form of creative expression didn't need to make sense to anyone but me. Again, if
Hmm.
you're, and that's why I loved those rooms. They're not there to fix me, they're there to witness me. In and I other people, whether it was loss, complex trauma, mental illness, addiction, people are just there to be people as we are. We're just people. And sometimes that meant like, as my writing, just made sense to me. If it made sense to other people, fantastic. But sometimes it also meant saying like things out loud that I didn't think I'd ever admit.
Hmm.
Um, Especially like when I'm deathly afraid of what would happen. Like I watched and knew, later on about everything that happened to my birth father, who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, the
Hmm.
then name for diagnosis,
Hmm.
before schizophrenia spectrum disorder, and I didn't want. I was deathly afraid of that, and so
Hmm.
writing and showing up in these spaces with strangers was the only way that I could cope. Um, I didn't know I was like healing too, which is cool.
Hmm.
Um, but I think what I wish science and the system offered me um, is more of that space. Like
Hmm.
I found it by accident. I went, I saw a video, I loved it, and was like, hey, I want to try that. I wasn't thinking maybe it'll help me. I was just enamored by it.
Hmm.
Um, and just, I think traditional mental health systems, we need more ways to, we don't need more like, of being like assessed.
Hmm.
We need places where we can express, where there's more opportunities to be heard and speak your unique truth to the world
Hmm.
without immediately being fixed or, like we talked about earlier, categorized neatly and packaged up neatly.
Hmm.
You know, Safety matters, interventions matter, yes, but so does being able to simply say things that might sound silly, like, this is what it feels like,
Hmm.
and have actually somebody listen to you.
Hmm.
Not hear you, but truly listen to you, and then hoping that by listening, they're also seeing.
Writing that down, I think that's a giant message for the mental health field. Thank you so much. What does it mean to you that, just in my own life, I love Noah Kahn. He's an artist, and I just watched his documentary where he gets really open and raw about, his experiences with mental health, and he's been really active in terms of being open about his struggles in that space and creating ways to combat that and help others who are suffering. And, what does it mean for you to see other artists kind of, I don't even want to say coming forward, but just being so vulnerable and raw? And also One Mind and other big like mental health organizations who are finally like really doing a good job of embracing arts and mental health. Like, what does that mean to you, Alex?
Um, I think it's the coolest thing in the world, especially um, get this for I've been writing now for 18 years. Um, Hundreds of poems, short ones, long ones. Um, um, and I didn't know about like this lingo, social prescribing,
Hmm.
arts and mental health until literally not even 3 years ago when
Wow.
I met my now really good dear friend Alex, who taught me all of what this was. And she was just like, "Oh no, you like if you're writing and you're expressing yourself in that way, like you're literally doing this." And I just didn't have the language for it. And seeing that it's this giant catalyzed movement and has been for decades now, and we're embracing it. And places like One Mind are investing in this, and or like organizations like Social RX, who works in social prescribing as well. I think we were at a precipice of change, and we're embracing that change and that turning point. I think when an organization again like One Mind or Social RX are really like investing in what this looks like, where we're focusing on, not just mental health and physical health, but we're focusing on the expression and the social health aspect as well. It signals that like this isn't it's not fringe anymore, if that makes sense. It's becoming part of a much broader conversation, one that's needed to be had about what mental health care and like access can look like. We don't just need, you know, here's your assessment, here's your diagnosis, here's the pills to help you cope with that diagnosis, and you're on your merry way, right? Now we're looking at all of the things that are making us like wholesomely as humans be better through this like human-centered approach. And I think for somebody like me, or at least again through my own experiences alone, who found this in community spaces, I think long before I even recognized what it was, it feels like a bridge is being built, if that makes sense. But I also know that, and I think that this shift comes with a lot. It bears a lot of weight and a lofty responsibility, because bringing this type of work into larger systems means that we also have to protect the voices and the authenticity of the people courageous enough to continue to share their story. And I will say, even the ones who are choosing not to, or who are not at that stage in their journey where they can, or they want, or they feel comfortable sharing themselves
Right.
out there in a different way. And I feel like if we can do that well, if as we grow, we can continue to encapsulate, embed, uplift, celebrate, you know, we're we're not we're what we're doing is something bigger than just taking care of ourselves. We're finally embracing what humanity and like real connection looks like. And
Yeah.
I feel like if we can do that well and just hold on to that as just a constant reminder as this type of work expands, we're not expanding. I feel like we're transforming
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah. And just transforming society, not just in the mental health, treatment and recovery space. Alex for president. Oh my gosh. You got like, no.
I'll just stick to writing. I'll
Oh
stick to
my
writing.
gosh, get out of here. But no, seriously, this has been incredible. And I just want to give you the last word. What do you want people to take from this conversation, especially people from struggling today? Like, what's the one thing you would say to them?
Ooh, that's always like a really fun question. I've answered it, I feel like 1,000 times, but each time I still can't come up with a good answer on the spot.
No pressure.
I think if there's one thing I want people to take away, um, if even from my own experience, it's that like you you don't have to wait until you're like version of you don't have to fit inside someone else's version of okay to express what you're going through or how you're feeling or what you are experiencing. Because I think that there's this idea that like we have to make sense of things before we share them.
Hmm.
That like I was saying earlier, that we have to polish and clean and make
Hmm.
ourselves presentable and nice and neat in order for you to understand. And that is completely wrong. In fact, I think it is the complete opposite. Again, from my own experience, I I had no idea what I was trying to share. I was just writing words and then getting on a stage and, you know, sharing. And
Yeah.
that was all the sense that I needed. I was trying to be a better poet and like actually like, get some snaps, but like you don't ever have to wait. And I implore folks not to wait to try to fit inside someone else's version of okay to express who you are in any form, whether that be creative expression or just expression in general. Because I think inherently all expression is creative because it was created uniquely by you based on your own experiences. But, sometimes just the simple act of expressing is what helps things like make sense, and it's what starts to move the needle. So
Hmm.
again, whether that's, writing something, saying something, creating something, riding a horse, painting, drawing, even if it's just for you, it matters and it always matters. And, I think, you know, and I'll leave it with this, again, and I think I've said this a few times, but like the point is never the medium, how you choose to share. The point is the expression that you do share. Even if it's just for you, put it out there. Find a way to allow your internal world to exist outside of you, And I use this old adage. I'm a big fan of Alice in Wonderland. My whole mental health journey is literally tattooed on this arm. Um, and I think, you know, sometimes I feel like what might seem like tumbling in the dark, which I did for so long, to use an appropriate metaphor, is and was actually the beginning of discovering a world where like my story finally made sense. And you can do that too. There's never there's never a right moment. There's never a good time. You do it.
Wow. Alex, you need your own podcast, my friend. That was so cool. I just want to first just thank you for your openness, your extreme courage. I've heard you speak before, but it just every time you share your story, like you're saying, like I feel it. The connection between your creativity and you finding healing, you're not just surviving but thriving, actually, is something that I feel like a lot of people feel, but they don't see that reflected in, the current landscape of what we call mental health. And I really do feel like this conversation today and the work that you're doing is helping to change that conversation. It's really transforming. For listeners who want to learn more about you, I'll provide some links, especially read that article that Alex wrote on the One Mind blog. It's fantastic, and I'll have some more links. If today's episode really resonated with you, of course, please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, share it with someone who you think would benefit. We're on social media at BrainSTEM Podcast. Anything else, Alex, you would like to plug?
No, I just thank you for just giving me one more place to express myself in a a, a way that I people don't get to do very often, and I always treasure these moments, and I want to see more of these, moments put out there because that's where this starts, just being able to express yourself.
Yeah, as do I. And thank you so, so much for your time. This was so much fun. I can't wait to see you again soon. Thanks again.